Meantime, President Trump responding after Twitter flags two of his tweets on mail-in voting fraud. The president tweeting, quote, "Twitter is completely stifling free speech, and I, as president, will not allow it to happen." Howie Kurtz, of course, is a Fox News media analyst, host of Media Buzz. Good morning, Howie.
Good morning, Ed.
Let's start simply with why now? Why do you think Twitter took this action?
Well, it's no coincidence to me that Jack Dorsey, the Twitter CEO, took this action on the very day that he refused to act against these other presidential tweets invoking a conspiracy theory involving the 2-decade-old accidental death of a Joe Scarborough, a congressional staffer, despite a heartfelt letter from the woman's husband. So this is like a makeup call in basketball. Well, we're not going to call a foul here, but we'll slap this little warning label, do a little wrist slap over here.
But then who decides who's calling the fouls moving forward? And when you get it back to the political realm of we don't like what the president's saying or we don't think it's true what he's saying about mail-in voting, are you also going to start fact-checking Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, or, say, the World Health Organization?
That is exactly the point that I was going to make. It's odd that Twitter chose these particular tweets about voting by mail to take its stand, and it does raise the question, given the long-standing complaints by conservatives of bias by Twitter and other social media outfits, of is there going to be an equal application of this standard? Who even knows what the standard is? Twitter has always maintained this fiction that, oh, it's just some community bulletin board, not a major media company, because it hasn't wanted to spend the money to do its own fact-checking, so now it's trying to outsource it to other outlets like CNN and the Washington Post that the president and many conservatives view as liberal and have certainly been very negative toward President Trump.
To your important point about Twitter saying it's not really a media company, it's just this bulletin board. They're not really policing things, although now they're policing it in this case. Wall Street Journal has a story with important context this morning about Facebook privately doing this study where these executives months ago were looking at how it had become divisive, the platform, and looking at ways where they could make it less divisive. And then they eventually basically shut that down and didn't find ways to make it less divisive. So my question is it the medium? Is it the messenger? Is it both? Who's to blame for the cesspool that social media can become?
Yeah, it certainly can be an ugly place. Look, social media is in something of a box because it wants to make all this money, Facebook, Twitter, Google, you name it, from users, and at the same time doesn't want to do what a news organization does, which sometimes you have to make difficult judgments about whether something is flat out false, misleading, hate speech, or whatever. They do sometimes make attempts on hate speech. But I do have to say, I understand the president's frustration here. I understand you heard from Newt Gingrich earlier, conservatives feeling like the game is rigged against their point of view. But when the president says if Twitter doesn't clean up its act, we will strongly regulate them or shut them down, the president doesn't have the authority to close down a private company, even if it is biased. But I do think this is being fought out in the court of public opinion. And right now, this is just a couple of Band-Aids on a very deep wound that Twitter is attempting, and it's not going to stop the bleeding.
To your point, not going to be able to shut them down, perhaps, but they might be getting tax breaks that the federal government may be looking at. Josh Hawley, a Republican senator, was on Fox and Friends this morning. Here's his view on whether conservatives are being targeted. Watch.
Big tech gets a huge handout from the federal government. They get this special immunity from suits and from liability that's worth billions of dollars to them every year. Why are they getting subsidized by federal taxpayers to censor conservatives? They need to explain. We need some answers.
So answer that, but also I mentioned the World Health Organization a moment ago. I mean, they tweeted some months ago that that China found no human transmission of COVID-19, which obviously has turned out to be false. I'd never heard about a fact check on that. I know there was pressure on the World Health Organization to delete that tweet. They had not done that for a long time. So the question is, who's really policing this? And conservatives feel like they're the ones being targeted.
Yeah, I mean, and there's certainly anecdotal evidence that that's true. I don't think every conservative voice is being silenced, but it is true. Sometimes there are flat-out lies on Twitter and on Facebook, and they can't. These companies can't seem quite to figure out what to do about it, especially when you've got a president with 80 million followers. Now, the federal government can certainly inflict pain in the ways that you just described. But a better approach, I think, would be to have one standard, hold everybody, Democrat, Republican, vegetarian, to the same standard and combat this impression. And it is a serious liability for these companies that they are, these Silicon Valley companies are more interested in helping the left.
Safest thing we can say is that Sunday, 11 a.m. is going to be a big topic on your program.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Howie.